Welcome back to Nurturing Humble, First Five Humble podcast. I am your host, Karina Vasquez. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who tuned in last month to our very first episode. We've gotten a great response, and I'm excited to continue our ACEs conversation today. In part one of our ACEs series, we heard from a local pediatrician, Dr. Michael Mungajas, about the impacts of ACEs and the role of trauma-informed care and understanding family stories in the pediatric world. Today, we continue the conversation with a new perspective in child health and community resilience. We're getting a therapist's view on healing ACEs and parent-child connection. We're going to dive into episode 2, part 2, with our wonderful guest, Julie Branson. Julie Branson is a mental health therapist who's been working with children and families in Humboldt County for over 15 years. Her work is grounded in authentic connection, play, and the belief that healing happens when you feel truly seen and heard. In today's episode, we talk about how ACEs show up in everyday family life, what resilience looks like in practice, why play matters in the healing process, and how small moments of connection from caregivers can make a lasting impact. I hope you guys are just as excited as I am and as my team was when I told them that Julie was going to be on the podcast. I know this conversation is going to be really great.
That's really nice to hear. I'm glad you asked. As soon as I saw that you guys were going to start a podcast, I thought, oh, that would be fun to go on there at some point. And then you reached out to me pretty quickly, so that was exciting.
I was definitely excited to get your thoughts on ACEs and kind of a local therapist perspective on what's going on in the county and some suggestions around play and family connection. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Karina. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a huge fan of First Five and all that you guys do for our community. So my name's Julie. I'm a therapist. I've been working in this community for a really long time, and I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I work in private practice in my office is in Eureka, and I've done that for about 4 years now. I work with people from throughout this span of life, but I work with a lot of moms and also some kids. And before working in private practice, I worked for the county for about 15 years. And most of that was at the Healthy Moms program, which is a substance abuse treatment program for moms with young kids. And so I had a lot of experience there working with little kids and with mothers. And so it's nice working now in private practice, getting to work with all kinds of different people, but I definitely really have a big place in my heart for working with moms, and I love little kids. So I'm happy to be talking with you about that.
Thanks, Julie. Before we jump into the nitty-gritty of our conversation, I would love to know why you became a therapist. Maybe a little bit of background on what really inspired you and drives you to do this type of work, and what it's like to be a therapist here in Humboldt.
Yeah, so I grew up in Illinois, so in the Midwest, and I was a really sensitive kid who was born into a pretty harsh family environment. And I relied really heavily on people that were supportive of me, friends, teachers, therapists who really helped me through the struggles I was going through at home. And in my high school, there was a program called the Peer Helpers Program. And in that program, there were kids that were chosen to get some kind of special training about being an active listener and how to support people. And as part of that program, they put out a survey. So when I was a freshman in high school, I got this survey asking, who do you go to when you're struggling? Who can you trust with things that are hard? Who is a good listener? And I remember putting the people down that I felt like I could go to, and just feeling so grateful for them and realizing how much they meant to me. And at the time, it didn't even occur to me that someone might write me down on their survey. And when I got the letter in the mail saying that I was one of the people chosen to be in the program, it just meant so much to me, and I was sold. I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be a therapist. And so I was pretty laser focused on that goal all through college, and I got my master's degree, and then I moved out to Humboldt right after I was done with school. And so I knew I wanted to be a therapist from the time I was really young, but I didn't know what exactly that would look like, what program or what population I would work with. And when I got here to Humboldt, I loved everything about it here. I love this community, and I love the beaches and the forest and just the whole community. I really felt at home here in a way I never did before. And when I started working as a therapist here, I got a job working for the county, and they they kind of just hire you for a position. You don't always know what program you're going to get plugged into. And I got put into a program working with teens in the juvenile justice system, which was pretty hard for me. It was kind of a challenging role, but it really gave me an opportunity to see the struggles in our community. And it was really hard working with teens who had already been through so much trauma. And I kept feeling like I wish I could intervene sooner. I wish I could serve this community by accessing younger kids and helping things get on a different track earlier on. And so I think really that was a big part of being drawn to learning more about working with younger kids and kind of specializing in that. And so when I had an opportunity to shift to a program working with younger kids and moms, I snatched that opportunity up. And partly I was also knowing that I wanted to have a child of my own soon at that time. So it was kind of this beautiful way to immerse myself in learning about child development and attachment and the needs of kids, and figuring out how to support our community by serving that population, while also learning myself how to be the kind of mom I wanted to be.
Wow, what an amazing program that really helped you continue following your path and finding your path here. Um, it's so nice to hear that you've been able to work with different parts of our community and where you are now. So let's go ahead and dive right in. We are centering this conversation around ACEs and then seeing where this takes us. From your perspective, how do ACEs show up in the lives of children and the families that you support here in our community?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's a big question. It's kind of hard to pin it down because it's so broad. There's so many ways that ACEs show up. But I guess one way to answer that is that there's kind of two major categories that I notice in the ways that ACEs show up in the work that I do with people. And one of those is the in the moment situation. So like a kid might be brought into therapy because there's a stressful situation happening. For example, if the family's going through a loss, they may bring the child into therapy because that's happening now. And they're needing support around that. But another major way that ACEs show up in the work that I do with people is in this way that's a shadow of the past. So, for example, like one of the, and when we, and for if people aren't, I think probably most of your listeners might have listened to the first episode and they might know a bit about what we mean by ACEs. But what we're talking about is there's like a list of 10 questions that you can ask someone on a survey that kind of get at some of the major stressors that can have an impact on outcomes for kids. And so, like, for example, one of them is, I don't know exactly how it's worded, but it's something like, did someone in your family yell at you, insult you, put you down? So if that is the truth for one of the parents in the family system, there's a couple ways that could come out as a shadow. So like one way is maybe when there's a stressful situation in the family dynamic, even a parent who wants to be kind and patient and loving to their kid, if they grew up in a household where they were being yelled at and insulted and put down, there might be a part of them that gets triggered and comes out in a harsh way towards the child. So that's like a way that the past might be repeating itself in certain moments. But there's also more subtle ways that that same ACE item, that same stressor of like growing up with a parent who was putting you down, it could come out in another way too, which is like maybe you're a parent who had that experience and you are so scared of letting your kid have that same experience. You remember how bad you felt as a kid when someone was putting you down. And so maybe you now as a parent have a hard time setting limits or being um, a sturdy leader to your kid at times because you're having a fear that your kid's going to feel the way you felt. And it can make it hard sometimes for parents to be comfortable tolerating their kids' distress and trusting that that distress is resilience building and appropriate, when it's like something like setting a limit about something, within like the range of normal limits. So sometimes that shadow of that ACE can have an impact on the family system and in those ways where it's making it hard, getting in the way of someone being the kind of parent they want to be or providing the kind of balance that their kid needs. So those are just like, that's just one of the ACEs, and that's just a couple of the ways that one ACE could show up in families. But I think those are the two main, like if I had to put it in two broad ways, it's like one is like, how is it showing up right now? And two, how is it showing up as a shadow from the past?
I mean, it's just, there's so many layers to it. And so I really appreciate, this take on it that, I mean, you can't really give one clear answer, one straight answer about like how all of ACEs kind of impact families and children in different moments. But I think you made a really great point to say, how is it showing up right now? And also, how is the shadow of an ACE, of that trauma, kind of showing up and impacting the family system? I think I heard a quote one time that was talking about like how our trauma is basically, dump paint and color a situation in a way that maybe we don't understand. Like we don't understand why we're getting triggered or why we're reacting like this, but it's, it's our past. It's that trauma kind of coloring a story in a certain way. And so it's kind of that shadow of ACEs that you're talking about. I would love if you could tell us, I mean, ACEs is so complex, but how do you introduce the concept to parents or caregivers in a way that feels, supportive and empowering rather than overwhelming? How are you holding that space for their own stories as they navigate the family system?
When I'm starting to work with someone new, I ask about those things, but I try to intersperse it with questions about their strengths, their resources, their resiliency factors, so that it doesn't feel so heavy and that it's balanced with strengths. So that's one thing that I do to try to make that conversation less overwhelming, is to kind of balance it out with questions about positive things. But then the other thing is that when I'm like just getting to know a family or a new person that I'm working with, I'm generally not diving deep into all of those stressors. I'm just trying to get a general sense of anything big I need to know about. But then most of the time, it's kind of like pulling a thread. So like, for example, like the things we were just talking about how ACEs can show up as shadows from the past, and then they can show up in the present. So what I mean by pulling a thread is like, let's say I have a mom I'm working with, and she's telling me like that she's having a hard time setting limits with her kid. And it's getting really stressful for all of them. So then I might pull a thread by saying like, well, what do you remember about how things were in your family when limits were being set? Or I might say, what do you remember about what was going on for you at the age that your kid is now? Or what are you feeling right now what does it feel like in your body? What memories are connected to that feeling? When do you remember feeling that way before? Those are just an example of some of the ways that you can kind of pull a thread of like something that's showing up now, and then bringing this curiosity to where is that connected to the past. And then it kind of opens up slowly and gradually and in a way that's relevant of what those how those aces are showing up, rather than like pulling all of it out at once. I don't know, like overwhelmed with this narrative that could be too much to contain for some people.
Yeah, that reminds me of kind of what Dr. Mangajas was saying when we had him on the podcast, talking about, things slowly start to unravel the way that they need to really understand, what's really going on in the family story. I'm so curious because, something we talk about a lot in play groups or when we're talking with families amongst our team is that it's so challenging to help somebody, with whatever they need at the moment, whether it's, developmental questions or postpartum care, things that are coming up, their personal healing, while also dealing and navigating larger challenges and systemic issues like poverty or racism, limited access to care, especially here in the county. So how do you have those kind of conversations? How do you see that play in your work, intersecting with ACEs, trauma, and also the systemic issues?
Yeah, that's a tough question, Karina, because those things are so big, and a lot of them feel like they're out of our control. And that can be hard because they're not things that are easily fixed, or maybe some of them are not things that I can fix at all. But I think some of the things that are important to me around those issues are, one, to trust our community. So I need to remember, especially now that I'm in private practice rather than like in part of a program where I'm working with other providers, um, I try to remember that I'm not alone, that there's really good programs in our community. Sometimes I refer people to case management, which is if you have partnership, there's case management services or something that's covered with that. And a case manager can help you navigate resources, get connected to more supports. Um, Sometimes I refer people to 211, which is a great resource for like finding out what supports are available to help with some of those broader challenges that families face. Um, Sometimes I encourage, like if I'm working with a kid, and I notice that the parent is holding a lot of stress, I might encourage the parent to also have their own therapist, so that it's not so that they're getting support as well. So I guess that's one of the things that I try to do, is to make sure that it's not just the family alone, and it's not just the family and me. It's like, who else can we bring in to support this family unit? Because there's a lot of really good things happening in our community. Play groups are an awesome way to bring in more support and make people feel like they're not isolated with those challenges. And then another thing I want to say about that is about what your question about the broader challenges is that sometimes a parent can feel like their job is to make sure their kid doesn't experience stressors. That's impossible, but it can sometimes feel like we don't want to see our kids struggle. We don't want to see our kids hurting. And so it can feel like that is what we want to do, is to protect them from all of that. And I think one of the things I try to remember is, and try to empower parents with, is that we can't always do that. We can't always protect our kids from everything that's stressful. And I can't always protect the families I work with from all the stressors that are out there in the world, but we can get through it together. So there's the stress, but then there's also connection. There's the connection of like the parent being there for the child through whatever stressors are coming their way. And that is really powerful. And then there's the connection of like, I can't take away all of these stressors that your family is going through, but I can be with you through it. Like, we can get through this together.
Wow, what a beautiful way to tackle that very complex question. Thank you, because I think you did a great job highlighting what we talk about, the power of connection, right? It's interesting here in Humble because we so often focus on that lack of access of care or, the systemic issues that we have here locally. But I think what's true about our communities, we see it all over Humble. We see it in Redway and Hoopa. We see it up north here in the coast, that sometimes the lack of access of care intensifies and turns up the importance of community care and how community shows up. I really appreciated the conversation around play with, our local pediatrician and the importance of that. So I'm curious on your take around play. Can you give us a little bit about why play is so important for parents, in your experience, what makes it important in a child's emotional and social development?
Yeah. So play is so much of what kids learn everything through. In some ways, it's like when we're talking about young kids, like kids from like 2 to 5, it's almost like that's their whole thing is play. So, I mean, I feel like I could go on forever about the ways that play supports kids and their development. But in terms of like their emotional development, let's take that for a second. Okay, so like, okay, well, let's just take therapy, right? I'm a therapist. So people bring their kids to me. They want me to help their kid with their emotions, right? That's like a common thing. So if I were to sit down with a kid, a 5-year-old kid, and try to talk to them about dealing with their emotions, go through skills about regulation, have a conversation about it, it would not go well. They would not care. They would not want to have a very long conversation about that. But if I want a kid to develop frustration tolerance, for example, and I put some toys in front of them, they're going to get frustrated in the moment, right? They're going to get frustrated because the Legos won't fit together properly, or because they build a tower with magnetiles and then it crashes down on them, or because they can't get the shoes on the doll the way that they want. And so then in the moment, in this way where the stakes are low, right? Like if they're safe, they're playing, it's like a positive atmosphere. Within that context, in the moment, we can work on dealing with that frustration that just naturally comes up. So, and also you can manipulate the play, right? So that you can start out, if a kid is having like really hard time with frustration, you can start out with toys that don't cause that much frustration, and then gradually build to having, like paints or something where there's like a more demand, right? And it's going to be more requirements for them to tolerate that frustration. So you can manipulate the environment in a way that the child has this freedom to play, but that you're addressing the skills they need for building those emotional regulation skills in a way that's very in the moment. And then you talked about, I think you asked also about social development, which is also like, there's so many ways that play facilitates that. So like one example is when kids are playing, they're taking on different roles when they're doing like dramatic play, for example. And so that's this amazing way that they're learning perspective taking, they're learning empathy, they're learning what it's like from different points of view. And so that's like part of what's happening when they play. Part of what's happening when they play is socially is they're trying to get their parent, well, like if they're playing with their parent, for example, they're trying to get their parents' attention. They're trying to get their parents' approval or enjoyment. And so they're noticing what works and what doesn't. And they're noticing, oh, you know, when I snatch the toy away from my parent, they react one way. When I share, and include my parent, they act another way. And so they're learning also in a low stakes way, right? Their parents going to be more patient with them than another kid at school. When they're playing with their parent, they get this opportunity to learn those social skills in a way that's in the moment and that's really natural and that can be kind of modulated to where their skill level is. But I could talk about play forever. So this is just like a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love talking about play, and you have very special insight. You offer parent-child interaction therapy, PCIT, at your private practice. I'm curious to know a little bit more about that because I advocate for play with everybody that I know and work with. So could you tell us more about how play is used in that process in therapy?
So parent-child interaction therapy is an evidence-based program for using play to help parents and kids build a stronger connection and also to help parents learn positive ways to manage their kids' behavior. And when I was at Healthy Moms and working for the county, I had this pretty cool setup where I could watch a parent and child through a one-way mirror. So the parent and child would be playing together in a room, and the parent would be wearing an earpiece, and I could coach the parent on different skills while they were playing with their kid. Instead of the kid playing with me, I could really focus on that relationship between the two of them. And it was really powerful to watch the way that their relationship would change. Often those kids were in some kind of challenging situation because the moms were in treatment for substance use disorder. So a lot of those kids had been in foster care and were working on reuniting with their parent. And so it was really cool to see how coaching the parent on how to play with their kid and also giving the parent feedback about what I was noticing. Like what I mean by that is like sometimes those parents I was working with were struggling with a lot of guilt and their own sensitivities. And so they would see their kids reacting the way kids do, like with defiance or challenging behavior. And sometimes they would take that really personally and feel guilty about what their kids had been through. But I could help them when I was doing PCIT, I could help them notice the signs that things were improving or notice the ways their children were being affectionate to them so that I could kind of shift what they were noticing and what they were paying attention to. So that was how it worked in that context. Now that I'm in private practice, I do a version of PCIT that's less structured. Like I'm in the room with them and it's more relaxed than when I was doing PCIT in that environment. So there's a lot of different skills that parents are learning when they do PCIT, but one of the main things they're learning is how to do child-directed play, and we often will call it like special playtime. And so your listeners could do this with their kids at home. So what you're going to do is you're just going to take 5 or 10 minutes a day, and you're going to pick out some toys that are open-ended toys. So they're not like a board game. They're not like a game with rules. It's toys that could be played with many different ways. Like Play-Doh is great. Blocks are great. A dollhouse, play food, doctor kit, those kind of things. And then you're going to just sit down with the kid and you're going to not have in mind that you're trying to teach them anything. You're not going to have in mind that you're trying to control anything. You're just going to let the kid have a little space to play however they want to play. And you as a caregiver or parent are going to focus on praising them. So like letting them know what you like, that you see them doing, describing what the kid is doing. So kind of like a sports announcer giving a play-by-play. Like saying like, oh, you're building a tower, you're pushing the truck around, whatever they're doing, just talking about it. Imitating what the kid's doing. So like just kind of copying what they're doing and just enjoying the kid. So just joining in, enjoying them. And then there's a couple things that you would try to not do. So one of them is to try to not ask too many questions. And the reason for that is when we ask kids questions, we're kind of putting a demand on them, which we do ask kids questions. Like that's part of just interacting with them through our daily life. But during this special playtime, you try to not ask too many questions because it can kind of lead the play. It's requiring an answer of them. And so part of the idea in this special playtime is to not have too many demands on the kids, and so kind of let the kid have that sense of control. Also, questions can sometimes feel critical. So like if you come out, like if you can imagine yourself like let's say you were gonna go out on, I don't know, a date or something, and you came out and I said, like, okay, so in PCIT we would do describing or praising. So like it would be like, oh, you're gonna wear that. That looks great. It would be a praise way to say it or a describing way. But a question might be like, oh, you're gonna wear that? That doesn't feel as supportive, right? So we tend to ask kids a lot of questions when we want to engage them in PCIT. One of the things we try to do is reduce that and not give too many commands either. So it gives kids this space to just kind of be themselves and express themselves and enjoy the toys and enjoy the parent. And it gives the parent a chance to practice just witnessing the kid and enjoying them and connecting with them. And as that relationship is given that space, a lot of the things that might be challenging will decrease over time. So like even if your challenge with your kid is like they are they're not being cooperative or they're being challenging or they're being defiant, sometimes it's more powerful to focus on building more positive than even like sometimes just doing that, like building that positive relationship will have an impact on those more challenging behaviors.
What a great strategy to try for folks playing with their kids, some time where they can really focus on that kind of play. I feel like it's so tricky sometimes when we talk about parenting and children because we want to talk about play and connection. And then the other side of it is that, people can be feeling overwhelmed. So how do you help, in a moment where parents want to keep connection but need to set boundaries? Or how do you advise folks?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. So I think sometimes parents feel like they that they are setting boundaries when they're telling their kid what to do. Like if they're like, for example, if the kid's like watching TV and they're saying, you need to turn off the TV. And they're saying, I set a limit. I told my kid what to do. And then if the kid doesn't do it, sometimes the parent can get frustrated. One of the things that I try to think about is boundaries are what we do as the adult. So like, it's okay if your kid doesn't want to turn the TV off. It's okay if your kid doesn't listen when you tell them to turn the TV off. It's okay to just say, we're done watching TV. I'm going to turn the TV off. Like it's okay to step in and do it. So, or even if it's more harder things like aggression, it's okay to step in and say, oh, I'm not going to, it's one thing to say, don't hit your brother. It's another thing to say, oh, I'm not going to let you hit your brother. I'm going to pick you up now and move you away from him. Right. So it's like taking charge, I guess, is important. Even when we're being gentle, even when we're being compassionate, even when we're being parents who lead with love and kindness and respect, we can still take charge.
Wow, that really made me think about all of the different kind of conversations around discipline that we have with folks that we work with. When we're doing parenting classes or when we're at playgroups, one of the biggest questions that we get is around discipline, especially around regulating their own emotions when they're dealing with an intense moment with their little ones or something that's really triggering them. So what kind of tips do you have around discipline? Maybe you could offer some input on the $1 million question around discipline and regulation and how we can keep our cool and also move through challenging moments. Or maybe not keep our cool, but what else could there be?
So one of the things I think a lot about is moving from reactivity to being reflective. So that's hard to do in the moment. Maybe it's impossible sometimes to do in the moment, but I think it's really powerful to have some time set aside to be reflective. And the thing that's cool about kids is that they'll give us so many chances to practice. So if you are having a struggle with some dynamic with your kid and you're finding yourself be reactive in a way that isn't feeling right to you, um, you're going to get another chance to practice that dynamic, probably like within hours, right? So it's okay if it doesn't go right every time, but I think it can be really powerful to set aside some time with a therapist or with a supportive friend or a partner or even just with a journal, to practice being reflective. So that could mean like asking yourself things like, okay, so that I didn't like that interaction that just happened. What might have set my kid up for, having a hard time? Was my kid hungry? Was my kid tired? Was my kid overstimulated? And then asking yourself, what set me up for that? Was I stressed? Was I hungry? Was I tired? And then asking yourself, like, what got triggered in me, right? Like some of those thread questions I was talking about earlier, like, what was it like for me when I was in a similar situation as a kid? What kind of feelings or memories are getting triggered for me? And then talking yourself through, like, how can I be gentle with myself, curious with myself? Because that process of reflection is it's helpful at problem solving and planning moving forward. Like, how can I, set myself up to be better prepared for this situation the next time it comes around? But it also can be very regulating, especially compared to how we may talk to ourselves if we're not doing that. So, like, it's one thing to lose your cool with your kid and then take 10 minutes and ask yourself what was going on and be kind to yourself about that and say, well, no wonder I lost my cool. I was having a hard time. I was hungry. I need to slow down. Or no wonder I lost my cool. I was having this memory of when things were really hard for me as a kid. And gosh, I want to just give myself some care around that. That's a very different experience than what some of us sometimes do, which is lose our cool with our kid and then think, oh no, I'm a terrible mom. How could I have done that? I'm failing at this. Those kind of thoughts are very dysregulating.
Oh my gosh, yeah, totally. And we're talking about this in relationships, in the family system with like parent, caregiver, and kids, but this can happen so often in, all of our relationships. And so it's a great, yeah, great to kind of reflect on that. Like, what else was going on? Because having that guilt, isn't really helpful. We do our triple P classes and we talk about, yeah, rational thinking versus negative thinking. Because if you get stuck in the loop of negative thinking, it's not productive. And, it can look like a shift in mindset, like you just mentioned. Oh, they're trying to make me angry. No, they were probably hungry. They're probably tired. You're probably getting triggered. So totally. I just want to snap my fingers at everything you're saying. That guilt is not helpful.
Not only do you feel bad about feeling bad. And it becomes really quickly overwhelming. And that's a big difference than being reflective, either on your own or with someone who's supportive. And when we can get in the habit of being reflective, it helps us meet our own emotions with more pause and kindness and care. And that helps us in turn give that to our kids more reflexively over time. Um, and it also gives us opportunities to repair. So even if there is a moment of turmoil between you and your kids, if you take some time to reflect on what maybe was going on for you, what was maybe going on for them, what you would like to do differently next time, it opens this opportunity to come up to your kid later and say, hey, this happened earlier. It must have felt bad to you. It didn't feel great to me either. This is, what did you notice? This is what I'm going to work on. I care about you. I want to, work on this.
It's so nice to get this perspective from you because personally, when I've tried therapy, maybe I couldn't really find the right fit or really, I don't know, maybe I went into it a little bit intimidated, feeling like, am I going to find the right person? What do they want to know? Like, how do they care? How do they hold space? And so it's just great to hear from like a local voice. Like, you're doing this work here in the community and, you're a resource families can tap into. And you have this lens of like, I don't know, you feel really safe listening to your questions. It just feels so nice. I know that you really value yourself in the belief that healing happens when people feel really truly seen and heard. And I can really hear that from your answers. Um, those listening that are parents are able to pick up some great little tidbits here. And also for those of us that work with parents and caregivers, I think you have such valuable insight. And I'm curious from your perspective, what are some signs or how can you tell if a kid needs therapy? Because I think sometimes that can come up for folks like, okay, is it time for therapy? My kid's having these big reactions and they need to, work through it or whatever it may be. Or what are your general thoughts around therapy in the family system?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to just to be honest about our community, it's hard to find a therapist for a young kid. So, I think if you're noticing that your kid is having a hard time and that maybe their behavior is changed from what their normal behavior is, or they're having a lot of difficulty adjusting to some change that's happening in your family, like there's reasons that it makes sense to want to reach out for therapeutic support for your kid. And I don't want to discourage anyone from doing that if they think that that's what their kid needs. And if you do need to find a therapist for your kid, one resource to keep in mind is NCAMP, for a directory of the local therapists. That can be a great place to find a therapist. But I just also want to say that it can be really hard to find a therapist, especially if the kid is really young. We don't have a lot of therapists who specialize in that. However, as a caregiver, if you can get the support that you need, that's going to go a long way to helping your kid. So in no way does that mean that it's your fault if your kid is struggling. I don't mean to say that at all. However, sometimes when the caregivers are well supported and well cared for and getting the help that they need, then they can be the type of support that the kid needs. And it's so even when I'm working with a kid, what I'm really trying to do, especially with the littlest, the kids that are like between 2 and 7, they're not at a stage developmentally where they're reflecting on their thoughts, like how you and I were just talking about the power of reflection. Little kids aren't doing that. They just don't even have the capacity for that. They're in the moment. So when I'm working with a little kid, I'm really hoping that their parent is building their skills and capacity for giving the child what they need to get them through the challenges. Because even though kids can be super challenging, like they bring their own stuff to the table. It's not that it's the parent's fault in any way that a kid might be struggling, but it is the adult's responsibility to help the kid out of it. And they are the ones with the most capacity for giving that to the kid. So a kid isn't going to get a whole lot of benefit from 50 minutes a week of therapy. There is some benefit, but it's limited. but it's a much bigger benefit if the parent can learn ways to provide support for their kid, because they're with that kid 24/7. So I just want to I just want to say that there are some really great child therapists in our community, and if you feel like your kid would benefit from that, that's awesome. And I want to say it's also true that if you're struggling to find that and you're feeling like you as a caregiver could benefit from support, that's another way that you could ultimately support your kid, is by making sure you're well cared for, because you know your kid better than anybody. And when you're more at ease, when you're more supported, when you're um, getting the care that you need, then you're going to be in a better position to help your kid regulate their emotions and build the skills that they're trying to build.
To find that in themselves, I feel like is a powerful tool, you know, and support can look so different. And so I really appreciate your take. And you have given me such a great list of mental health therapists and different ways for folks to find outreach and find some help in the community, which I will leave in the show notes and have it posted on our social medias for folks to find. Julie, thank you so much for this conversation. I feel so, I don't know, like I don't know, talking to you just feels like a big warm hug and of support, and knowing that like there's people here in Humboldt, like I said, that just do this type of work is awesome. Are there any final thoughts that you have as we close out the show? Thank you so much for being here. But yeah, is there anything left that you want to share with those that are listening?
Well, I just want to thank you for having me on your podcast and for giving me this opportunity to talk with you. And I guess one thing I want to say is that there are so many right ways to parent, and we talked a little about some ideas or strategies or ways to navigate parenthood. But I picture with kids, I picture this big circle, and like there's lots of right ways to be a kid. So like part of our job as parents is to know what the boundaries are of the circle. Like there's certain things that are out of bounds that I'm not going to allow, but there's so much room to be yourself and we want to meet our kids with enthusiasm and acceptance for the many, many ways they can show up in their authentic little being and celebrate their uniqueness within this big circle of things that are, in bounds, and then be firm about what those consistent boundaries are out of bounds. And I think the same is true with parenting, is that there's a lot of ways to be a good parent. And so if there's a parent listening who heard something that didn't resonate for them, I want to honor that it is okay to not take parenting advice that doesn't feel right to you. And it is okay to just take what does feel right, because there are many, many ways to do it right. And there are a few ways that it can be, better or worse, but there's a lot of room of different ways to do parenting well. And so that was one of the things I was like a little nervous about coming on a podcast, because it feels a little strange to me to talk about these issues in a general way, because any parenting guidance that you can give could be, there's some parents that need more, like, okay, so like we need structure and we need nurturing. There's some parents that could benefit from more structure. There's some parents that could benefit from a little more flexibility. There's some parents that could benefit from more nurturing. There's some parents that could benefit from more freedom for independence with their kids. So it's hard to even say one thing that's going to this audience that's so broad. And so I don't know if there's things I said that are or aren't helpful for any one person who's listening, but I just want to honor that we each have such wisdom about what is right for us and what is right for our kids, and that there's many ways to do this well, and that your listeners know better than you or I do, Karina, about what is right for them.
Thank you so much, Julie. I so appreciate you. You can find Julie here in Eureka, providing therapy services. Like I mentioned, Julie gave me such great resources for folks looking for therapy here locally. So feel free to check out the show notes and also our social medias. Next month's episode is going to be very fun, featuring some very fun folks. So stay tuned and thanks for listening. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram and check out our website.